Due Process, winner of 19 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2010 New York Emmy for our coverage of voting rights, and the 2011 Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Discussion Series. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
We can't only cut, we can't only tax, and we can't only grow our way out of the challenges that we're facing. It's going to take a whole array of different strategies.
Strategies designed to close the widening gap between what government needs to do and what it can afford to do. Strategies to ensure we can educate kids, keep communities safe, maintain essential services. How to rethink 19th century systems for a 21st century New Jersey. That's the idea of a bold report called Facing Our Future, and the focus of this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
So we're paying more and getting less, bemoaning the economic crisis, high taxes, the failure of government, and too often hoping just to make it through another year. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and it's not that we don't get that we're in trouble. It's just we don't know what to do about it. So when the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers pulled together an expert panel, a leadership group, to look past tomorrow with a long-range call to action and some practical advice, we thought it worth listening.
And talking. So we've asked 3 members of that group to join us here in the studio for some straight talk on tough public policy options.
Oliver Quinn is a lawyer and former judge whose wide experience ranges from the Urban League of Essex County to stints in the state and federal government, from 15 years as a vice president at Prudential Financial to senior counsel now at Taft and Partners Communications.
Ingrid Reed may be best known for her work at Rutgers Eagleton Institute, but she's also held leadership positions at Rockefeller and Princeton University. She chairs the governor's task force on local government and ethics, and her work in civic journalism has led her now to chair the board of the new NewJerseySpotlight.com.
Ray Caprio is an expert on public administration and public policy, whose academic career at the State University has carried titles like department chair, dean, vice president for the Division of Continuing Studies, and now university professor at the Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy. He is also the co-executive producer of this program.
And so we welcome Ray and all of you here today. Let me start by a question about the focus of this report. Who is going to read it? It's a pretty hefty report, and I wouldn't imagine that I'll see many people in NJ Transit reading it. And you talk about some tough, long-held traditions in New Jersey like home rule, and you're talking about ideas that may spread across many constituencies. And I don't know how many public officials currently in office have signed up. So the question is, who is this report aimed at? Well, Ray, that's for you.
That's for me. Okay.
You were trying to look at Ingrid, but I think that's for you.
Okay. Okay. The report really was generated during the Great Recession, during, I think, the worst time, where it was clear that the traditional revenue streams were being choked off, and there were serious concerns about increasing property taxes and so on. And the group came together to begin to explore the issues of how we might look at this a little differently, because as you look at government in New Jersey, we've probably got 2,000, close to 2,000 different taxing units. Municipalities, school districts, sewer and water districts, and so on. And when you think about our structure, it was really a creation of the late 19th century. And so a number of people began to ask a very simple question, which is, here we are into the 21st century already. The way we organize, the way we distribute our services really is based on an organizational and structural model that's getting close to being 200 years old. And does it make sense, particularly in light of the resource constraints we might be facing in the future?
But Ingrid, let me ask you, given the likelihood for government to perpetuate itself as it looks when it begins, why would you think you got a shot at something like regionalizing schools, regionalizing tax assessments? How do you sell that, and how have you done on selling it so far?
Well, I think one goes back to the first question you asked, who's going to read this? We have a simplified version of this, not just a thick document. I think there is an audience out there, because I would say in the last 2 years, we actually have seen citizens say, hey, wait a minute, how is our government operating, and what can we do about it? And in all parts of the state, there are people who are saying, maybe we could do a better job if we put all of our emergency services together at the county level and charge municipalities rather than having all municipalities pay for it. But I think the other piece of it is that people would look at their own town and complain about their property taxes, but then assume that the state has a lot of money and that they should be sending money down if you think of the state being the top and municipalities being bottom, and not really getting it, that the state spends only 30% of what it takes in with income taxes that we pay to the state and sales taxes, and it does send down a lot of money to municipalities and counties, and that's not working right. They're not getting enough, or they're not spending it effectively. But that arrangement that we've had for a long time is not working if you're not happy paying your taxes and if you're not getting the services you want.
But if we talk about the arrangement, Oliver, it seems to me that on the one hand, there are just traditions that are old, like home rule and the many units into which our governments are broken up. But the other is that we have a tremendously heterogeneous society in New Jersey. You take, I was born in Hudson, but I live in Essex. If you take South Orange Avenue from Penn Station west out towards Essex Fells, you will drive through communities that are diverse in terms of ethnicity and class and caste and attitudes about public policy. So the regional ideas, which are part of what you've talked about in terms of reallocating both the revenue stream and presumably the decision making, is not only political in that it just attacks old vested interests, but it also attacks the notion that it's not so easy to bring communities with much varied identities together on these questions. How do you overcome those hurdles in order to begin talking more about these ideas?
I think our goal was to get the conversation started with a fundamental reality, which is that the status quo isn't working, and the status quo is not going to work, that the trending is in a very negative direction despite good intentions and some good actions. So what we're trying to do with the report is get people, whether they're in Western Essex County or in downtown Newark, to give them a foundation for having more informed conversations about what the role of government is and how we're going to support it. We recognized in going through the process of preparing the report that there wasn't going to be unanimity around anything. We can't even get unanimity around the facts, but we're putting the facts out in the hopes that people will either come up with other facts to refute ours or accept those as a basis for conversation, because there's just too much rhetoric around these pressing issues of our fiscal plight. And until we, as the citizens to whom government is accountable, begin to have more informed discourse around this and to look at some options, and it's okay if somebody looks at the option and says this won't work, but then if they say why, and we can have a continuing conversation around how do we plug that hole, how do we compensate for that deficiency, how do we get real around the circumstance that we're facing and our responsibility for fixing it, or our or the consequence of us living with the effects of not fixing it.
Ray, for those who haven't read the report, we have found it most interesting, but found it, frankly, a bit pie in the sky. What evidence do you have that the political will could possibly be here for even any one of the dozen options that you put out there?
Okay. Let's go back to some basics before I answer that. The first is that we looked at, both at the state budget level and at county and school district and municipal level, the likelihood of available resources versus continuing the 2009 level of services into the future. And in all cases, it was clear that there was going to be a deficit, in that we could not continue to fund the level of services at all of these levels of government at the level we were providing in 2009 without some
Can I just
change.
interrupt to ask, whether isn't that already part of the conversation that's going on in the body politic? I mean, maybe lots of people who disagree, but there are not many people who don't disagree that we are having shortfalls.
Our numbers for municipalities, for example, suggested that somewhere around $1.75 to $2 billion worth of services will have to disappear by 2016. Most people who've read the report that have a background in the area have not disputed the numbers. Right. The real issue here is, how do we begin to address how society, how the state can look at this problem and begin to make progress in achieving it. And one of the things I think we agree on is that there is no single solution. There's no silver bullet out there. And what we're advocating is that you need to look at a range of possibilities, some of which will work in some places and will not work in others. And this goes from a range of things. For example, looking at the possibility of county-wide reassessments annually. Frankly, we have the computer technology to do it. And what that would mean would be that we would be reducing the need for ongoing and repetitive reassessments, comprehensive reassessments. But more importantly, it would also reduce the amount of money municipalities have to give back in terms of tax appeal losses, which would save communities millions of dollars. So while people look at things like consolidation or this or that, what I think we're saying is that there are a range of strategies out there. Consolidation might be appropriate. Ingrid is very, very familiar with the Princeton example. But selective services, shared services at different levels.
But here, I guess here's the question that comes, because I think that one of the interesting things about the report is, first of all, the people you've assembled to talk about this are indisputably leaders of people who look at the public sector. I mean, not elected officials now, but people who've had vast experience in the public sector. On the other hand, when there's a revenue issue, you haven't made a hard recommendation about what should be the tax reform. And I know that's controversial, but my point is, it seemed to me when you assemble a body like the one you put together and you say we're going to ask the tough questions, then it seems to me, and it's unfair after you spent all this time putting this report, to say, why didn't you produce something else? But it wasn't just a little something else. You've talked about part of this picture being more imaginative about relating revenues to quality services. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you take the extra step and bite the bullet on some controversial recommendations on tax policy?
Well, I think that we didn't bite the bullet on either side. We didn't say how much you should cut expenses in order to match the revenue, and we didn't say change the revenue. What we wanted to say to people, look, this is not a world where you can keep doing what you have been doing and think you will have the money to pay for it. There's a recession, one thing. That means that there are fewer income taxes and sales taxes coming in. The value of property is less, so property taxes are less. But you also have services that you want, and you're not going to have the money to pay for it. And do you want to keep cutting those services? Because that's what we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years.
Right, but Ingrid, you'll notice that Ray nicely sidestepped my question, which was,
yes,
do you have any sign that the body politic would take any of these recommendations and run with them? And if not, is this not just another really smart report that goes nowhere?
I think what we're seeing, to pick up on what Oliver said, is that we're seeing people say where they are that they need to make some changes. One of those changes has happened in the legislature and with the governor. There has been an effort to deal with the expense of health care and pensions. It's tough. We may not be all happy with it, but you are seeing in very different places in rural Hunterdon County people advancing the idea of maybe it makes sense to administer schools on a county basis. In Somerset County, people are asking, how should police services be organized? I think the first step is that people needed to know this is serious. It's not going to change, and you can't live in a dream world. You need due process for this. The process has to start working, and you have to be able to believe it.
And I think, picking up on Ingrid's point, the real revenue crunch is going to come probably in 2 years. And that's because a lot of the progress that's been made with some of the healthcare reform issues kind of pushes off the real challenge as a result of the way in which the legislation is structured, phasing in the contributions. The cumulative impact of the new 2% property tax law, together with the pushing out of that healthcare reform, is really going to place a considerable burden on municipalities and counties meeting their service requirements probably by 2014.
You're obviously very concerned about the quality of discourse. If you're right, and you're the numbers guy, I'm being told, and your prediction about when the crunch comes, that's just on the verge of an election year. So what's going to be the quality of the discourse about these deep issues if we hit a crunch right at the time of an election?
I think it depends on where the discourse takes place. To Sandy's question, what I would like to see come out of this is not necessarily that the elected officials take it and run with it on their own, although that would be optimal. I want to see the people who they represent go to them and say, why can't we do this? Or why can't we do something like
You a
this?
revolutionary?
Or what's on that?
Is it
I
revolutionary?
was.
Okay.
However, can you think of a time and an instance when that's happened? Ray, you're the historian of this stuff.
Well, I think
Ingrid wants it.
Well, first of all, municipalities are asking those questions because many are constrained by civil service rules that just don't work anymore.
Yet another turf issue that you would have enormous difficulty circumventing.
But one of the important things is that people tend to look at government in this segmented way and don't
Because
often,
it is segmented, right?
Well, in some ways it is, but what happens in Trenton impacts Plainfield. I mean, it's more of a shell game than it is a set of silos. And so if we, through this report, and more importantly, through the meetings and presentations and conversations that we have out of the report, because you're right, people are not going to be riding New Jersey Transit reading this thing. But we have already had the experience of meeting with social groups, civic groups, religious groups, cultural groups.
So you got proselytizing.
Talking about
And the
these
core of the
issues.
message is what? When you boil it down, I'm the PTA, I'm the Volunteer Firefighters Association, I'm any civic group you could name, and I've invited you to come. What's the core message for us?
I think there's several. The first is we have to seriously look at what we're doing and do we really want to continue doing it? What are the range of services? We have 566.
But you got to answer that question. We can't. We don't have that choice. We can't keep going where we're going. You've already said that.
Yeah, well, I've already said that. In fact, if you look at the state budget, bringing up on the earlier point, we have roughly, in round numbers, a $30 billion state budget.
But don't you think people have got that point? Don't you think the body politic has? Or
But
maybe
only
not.
$6 billion
Okay.
is in direct state services.
Yeah.
The other $24 billion are redirected to other areas. Most of the income tax goes to support schools.
41%.
40 cents of every dollar that we pay in all of our taxes statewide goes to education. So the bottom line here is we cannot continue to do what we've been doing the way we've been doing it. So we have to begin to make choices. What are the services we want and what are the services we don't want? And how is the best way to provide those services? Are they individually through a single municipality, or might they be regional? Dare I say, might they be privatized? Might
That's
there
not
be
controversial.
might there be consolidation of municipalities? We've had and we've, you know, we are as a society always looking for the silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. What I think we're trying to say is that there is no silver bullet. Society, our communities all have to look at their own situation and come up with creative solutions. I think what the new report that has just been released did try and do is provide a wide range of practices, of innovations that have been proven throughout the country for us to look at and explore.
Is home rule more important anywhere than it is in New Jersey, where it's sacrosanct?
It is, but it's not as sacrosanct as you think, because we do have hundreds of municipalities that in one way, shape, or form share services with each other. And the question becomes, how far do we extend that? And how can we find new and creative ways to do better and maybe even save money? I'll give you a good example.
I'm at the meeting and I'm excited now. You told me crunch time is coming and we got some choices to make.
Right.
Ingrid, tell me, how will you lay out the choices if I'm the PTA, any given civics organization that wants to grasp what you're telling?
Well, I think that's all, as I say, that's already happening. School budgets have been cut, and people have been talking about what's the best way to provide bus service.
But isn't that the hollowing out rather
Go
than
ahead.
the change?
All right.
I'll give you
Ray
a good
wants to
example.
interrupt.
But Sandy had a good question.
and
Isn't
I-
that the hollowing out that you say we shouldn't do, as opposed to qualitative change?
And I refer to one of our leadership team members. In Essex County, there are 21 school districts. Okay? Do we need 21 purchasing departments? Every
want the political
piece of... I know and that gets back to the question you're asking.
But when it gets tight,
When
you may not.
every piece of literature on education indicates what you need is a good leader in the school. You need competent teachers. Okay, why are we in a situation
But you're
where
talking good
half
sense,
of
Ray. You're not talking about what may be practically
why would it
impossible.
not be practically impossible to have multiple school districts sharing the back office infrastructure?
Because it's that much patronage that doesn't get handed
But
out.
that's a whole-
It's that much civil service violation that gets challenged.
Right, and
well-
if you're relying on the people who are managing the status quo to implement change,
So you
it's
are
not
talking
going to
revolution.
happen.
And I'm
I am
being
talking
sarcastic. You're
revolution.
talking about
I'm
mobilizing.
talking about
Yeah, we're talking
mobilizing
about really
people.
changing
I'm talking
everything, and
about
we've got only 2 minutes left, so I
Right.
want
But
to
it-
ask
that's what
whether
it
you
is.
have any indication that our governor has read this report and has any interest in it.
No, I don't think we do. but
We
did
can
go to
say
his
that
administration.
members of his policy office
Right.
have seen it, read it, we've had a
And we believe you
discussion
watched
with
the
them.
due process, so now,
Right.
along
Now
with
we
the
know
Senate Majority
about it.
Leader,
Yeah.
they have
Right.
digested it.
And many members of the legislature have read it and talked with us. Other local leaders have read it.
So you're actually more dangerous than you seem. Because I mean, what you're talking about is fundamentally
It is.
looking at
And see,
restructuring how we make the important decisions that are coming up.
Exactly. That's
Exactly.
right. That's
Exactly.
right. That's what we want.
Exactly.
We want people to
Sandy,
have
did you know that's
services,
who we were
but
inviting for that?
Well,
But in
I'm
21st,
shocked to hear it.
21st century ways, I think that that's really what we're saying. How can we use technology better? How can we mobilize the people who work for us and with us in our municipalities in a better way? Job sharing, all the kinds of things that
And
we
you'll
have
mobilize
been
the young
doing.
people if you talk about adopting an internet sales tax, which is one of the specific things you ask people to
Oh, yeah,
think
they'll
about.
love you for
Talk
that.
about, but controversial, and it'll get a
But
response.
It'll get
that's an
their
honest
One minute left.
Another easy area, IT. The fact is, most of our municipalities are one-horse shows. They are not large enough to accrue the efficiencies and the productivity that is possible using IT. And so some other way of approaching it would certainly yield, even for the same money, much better service.
Okay,
If not
so-
savings, if you can get past, yes.
Ray, we
the
have 30
political
seconds left. I'm going to ask each of you in 10 seconds or less to tell me when we reconvene a year from now to talk about this, what's going to be the evidence that something has been moved by this really important report?
That, for me, the evidence will be that people are talking about these and other options.
right?
I'll ditto that one. Yes, that the conversation will be alive and robust.
Any political support?
And that they're actually doing, creating services in a different way, and there is political support for it, because that's what some elected officials are realizing the people want, and it's the only way to get out of this mess.
All right, so we leave it here for now. Understanding the conversation will have to continue, and not just on TV. Our thanks to Oliver Quinn, to Ingrid Reed, to Ray Caprio.
And to you for watching. We're here every week with cutting-edge issues of social justice, law, and public policy. For Sandy and all of us, I'm Raymond Brown. We hope to see you next time.
We're very excited about some of the options that are in place that could offer some real meaningful change. Some of them will save money now. Some of them will be revenue neutral. Some of them will actually cost money now. You know, investing in our technology infrastructure, that's going to cost some money now, but the rewards down the road will be tremendous. And that means conversations about taxes. It means conversations about investments. It means conversations about where you might cut or do differently or outsource. They're all those. We're not saying that they're, you know, every community's got to decide in some of these cases. There's no silver bullet. So that's the key in this, is that people need to be engaged to understand.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and watch us on demand on YouTube.